The DA Moonshot Pact, made up of several opposition parties, is set to meet for its inaugural Congress next week. That's to hammer out its mandate and plan of action ahead of next year's general election. Families of Marakana Massacre victims await justice 11 years on. And Department of Trade and Industry's Director of International Relations, that's Paulina Mamhobo, speaks to us ahead of the BRICS Inward Buying and Investment Business Forum. A very good afternoon. If you just joined us, you're coming to you live from our studios in Auckland Park here in Johannesburg. Thank you for tuning in. You're watching The Week Ahead. You can interact with us on our social media platforms. It's at Week Ahead, and our hashtag is The Week Ahead. I'm your host, Mfundo Mabalani. DA leader John Steenhuisen has again issued an open invitation to opposition parties to join its Moonshot Pact. The pact, made up of several opposition parties, is set to meet for its inaugural Congress next week to hammer out its mandate as well as a plan of action ahead of next year's general election. The coalition aims to unseat the ANC after next year's general elections and keep the EFF out of power. Addressing the DA's Gauteng Provincial Congress in Boksburg, Steenhuisen says a strong coalition is needed to ensure success. For more on this, we're now joined by political analyst Stephen Friedman. Mr. Friedman, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. Before we actually tackle the matters related to the convention itself, can you just give us your take on statements, firstly by Ms. Helen Zille on the future of politics, where she went on to state yesterday that these coming elections will be a battle between the ANC and the DA, but future battles will be between the DA and EFF. What did you make of that?
Well, it's part of, first of all, it's the two aspects of it, both of which are relevant to your question about the coming meeting. The first one is to do something which the DA has been trying to do for years, which is to persuade opposition voters that there's really only one opposition party and that they should support the DA rather than any other opposition party. The second one is that the EFF has become, in the DA's own words, public enemy number one. So, a lot of this is based on an attempt to instill fear in the constituency that supports the DA, and if fear of the ANC is not as easy to instill as it once was. I mean, people might not like the ANC, but they don't fear it. But there is a lot of fear of the EFF in the suburbs. And therefore, if you can position yourself as the enemy of the EFF, then in theory, at least, you're supposed to make yourself very popular in the suburbs. And really, there's a lot of that in this in the meeting next week, because, of course, the meeting next week is designed to rally against the EFF as much as against the ANC. Mm-hmm. And also, I don't believe that this meeting really is about uniting opposition parties. It's about establishing the DA as the chief opposition party.
Mm-hmm. I just want to take you, before we get just to that statement that perhaps it's possibly to establish the DA or perhaps grow its popularity. Just Helen Zille also on popularity. She says the polls indicate that they are within spitting distance of surpassing the ANC. But if we were to look at the 2019 elections data, they attained 20.7% of the vote, while the ANC attained 57%. And what we do know of developments between then and now is that there's been the founding of Action SA, Bosa by Musi Maimane, and Shiluba by Bongani Baloyi. So would they really be polling higher? Because one would think these particular parties would be chipping at their own voter base.
Indeed, and they are. And it's simply mythology. It's simply fantasy. I mean, not only, so you quote correctly the 2019 national election results. Let's look, which is the even better indication, let's look at the 2021 local election results. And the reason those are interesting is that it was the ANC's poorest performance ever. They got 46%, below 50%. There, DA got 20%. So even when the ANC is on its knees, the DA is less than half the size of the ANC. Now, if we want to get a sense of what's been happening since then, you have to look at the municipal by-elections, which have been held since then, because that gives you an idea of how real South Africans have voted. And there's nothing in those by-election results to suggest that the DA is even coming close to challenging the ANC. You're correct to say that their vote has been chipped away by Action SA. I mean, Chiluba's new. We have to see how they go. But also their vote has also been chipped away by the Freedom Front Plus.
Yes.
And what they've done in the last few months is that they've managed, I think, to stabilize their situation so that they're not bleeding anymore. But that still puts them in a national election at about 20%. The problem that the DA has, one of the many problems the DA has, is that there are a lot of disillusioned ANC voters in this country, but they don't support the DA. If they're angry with the ANC and they don't want to vote for the ANC anymore, they stay at home rather than voting for the DA. So ANC's decline at the polls doesn't translate into gains for the DA. There's no evidence to support that.
Then to the convention itself, you reckon it's a facade, but Mr. Steenhuisen reckons this is by far possibly the most important political conversation that could ultimately see a new party governing our country after 29 years. You're still saying that this is merely their plan to take over these smaller parties?
Well, I find it interesting that Mr. Steenhuisen talks about party rather than parties, because, of course, what Mr. Steenhuisen is aiming for, as I said before, and as Mozilla says in her statement, this is really between the ANC and the DA. And it's not between the ANC and the DA. It's between the ANC and a whole lot of other parties who are important in this process. Now, the other thing that I think needs to be stressed is that if you're uniting against the ANC in this country with our electoral system, you don't need a pact like this because you can't split the vote. All the parties that are attending this meeting, the serious parties which are attending, the IFP being the biggest of them, they're already in Parliament. If they don't have any pact with the ANC, they're going to get the same vote as if they did have with the DA. They get the same vote as they would if they had a pact. In fact, they may get even less votes if they have a pact with the DA, because some of their supporters may not want to support a party which has a pact with the DA.
And that's what I wanted to get to around. Apologies for interjecting there. That's what I wanted to get to around the political identity of some of these parties, because it has been a concern of theirs that possibly we'll lose our political identity if we were to sign into such an agreement so prematurely before we go to campaign, because like you mentioned, the IFP could easily be asked by some of its members to say, so now must we assume that you endorse the Democratic Alliance's policies?
Well, indeed, and that's why most of the opposition parties, many of the opposition parties, won't go into this. And precisely because they don't want to be swallowed up by the DA, which is precisely what all this is about. You know, the irony of this thing is that the DA always claims that if everybody unites behind them, the opposition vote will increase. But in fact, I think, as we both say, the opposition vote would probably decrease because there are a lot of South Africans who don't want to vote for the ANC, but they don't want to vote for the DA either. And if you don't give those South Africans a political outlet, they'll stay at home. And the result will be a smaller opposition vote. So this is not about uniting to defeat the ANC. It's about projecting the DA as the only opposition party that matters, and that's why countless opposition parties are not actually going to this event because they don't want to become subsidiaries of the DA.
Now, there was a precursor event, not of the Democratic Alliance's design. The national government decided, I'm saying there was a precursor event last week where we saw the coalition dialogue headed by the Deputy President. We saw there in particular where a lot of the smaller parties left quite aggrieved, feeling that in essence, when there's going to be some sort of a framework here for coalitions, it's to keep them out. It's not to include them if you're going to see the threshold come to pass. You've also got the situation around limiting the votes of no confidence. All of those seemed to have left a bitter taste in their mouth. What does it mean for the convention coming up because the smaller parties are invited? Do you think they'll have a tough time explaining this position now of framework that will keep them out or curtail their powers, yet you're still courting them to assist you to ascend to that top seat?
It's a very good question. I mean, the first point to be made is it's one of the reasons why the smaller parties are not going to this convention in the main. It's because they look at this and they say, well, you see, we told you so. The DA wants to introduce all sorts of measures which would exclude us. And by my calculation, if the DA's proposal was accepted, the number of parties in Parliament would drop from 14 to 5. So that's 9 parties which would not be in Parliament anymore. Incidentally, those 9 parties, by my calculation, represent about 600,000 South Africans. So clearly they're going to say, look, we told you all along that these people don't actually take us seriously, and they've just shown you don't take us seriously. But the second point, which I find very interesting, is that the Freedom Front Plus, which is a very strong DA ally, has gone on record opposing all of this and saying we don't want all these controls on smaller parties, obviously because they're a smaller party. So, you've got 2 parties at this coalition meeting who can't even agree on what should be done about coalitions. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that meeting pans out, because essentially, if the DA's proposal was accepted, the Freedom Front Plus are worried that they might actually not be a party in Parliament anymore. And that doesn't seem to be the grounding for a very happy relationship.
Mm-hmm. And then just in closing, politics aside, what are your views around this attempt to stabilize coalitions, given what we've seen, particularly here in Gauteng, in our metros?
I think it's something South Africans need to be very worried about, because what both the 2 biggest parties are trying to suggest to us is that the way to deal with this coalition problem is to cut down on the choices of voters, to give voters less choice than we have at the moment, and to give political parties less choice than we have at the moment. And the result is to make sure that we have less democracy in this country. The coalition problem is not a disaster, and it's certainly not worth sacrificing democracy in this country for. So, to me, if you're going to say that the answer to coalitions is that you can't introduce a motion of no confidence to get rid of incompetent people, and that 600,000 people are going to be denied a voice in Parliament, then I think we're better off with turbulent coalitions than with taking away people's rights.
All right. Professor, thank you very much for your insights this afternoon. That was political analyst Professor Stephen Friedman. Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, Wednesday will mark the 11th anniversary of the Marakana Massacre. No less than 44 people were killed in violence in Marakana in the northwest. 34 were striking mine workers who were shot and killed on the 16th of August 2012. For more, SABC News spoke to Seri attorney Asenati Tukela.
Over the years, Seri has represented 36 of the 37 families that lost their loved ones in Marakana between the 13th and the 16th of August in 2012. And in the pursuit of justice, we haven't received any measurable success and any form of compensation that could provide the level of healing that our clients require from the state. We have launched in 2015 a civil claim on behalf of 36 families, a civil claim in which we claim for about 4 or 5 heads of damages against the state. The first and primarily being the apology. An apology that shows that there is a level of recognition and appreciation of what Marakana is to the country and to the country's democracy, firstly, but also the level of damage that Marakana caused on the families. So an apology that kind of shows that there is acknowledgement of what Marakana is, and not just it being described as a dark moment in our history.
Yeah.
The other part of our claims was the loss of support, because the deceased were breadwinners in their families. They were fathers, they were husbands, and they were siblings who provided socio-economic care to their families. And the rest of the claim that we brought on behalf of the families was in relation to the damages. The damages in relation to trauma, pain, and suffering, psychiatric injury as a result of the massacre and the brutal murder of people's loved ones. And lastly, constitutional damages for loss of parental care, because children were minors, were orphaned by the state through the police. Widows have, the wives of the deceased have become widowed. As a result, we claim for constitutional damages for loss of parental care and constitutional damages for loss of spousal support. In our civil claim, we've submitted 5 heads of damages. And the settlement that was presented by the state between 2018 and 2019 was in relation to only 1 head of damages, which is the loss of support. I mean, it is obvious, we do not have to dispute that if breadwinners are deprived from families, then there is a level of support socioeconomically that is deprived from those families. So the state considered on the loss of support, and that is why they settled and provided for compensation only in relation to loss of support. But there hasn't been compensation for the trauma and the pain and the suffering that Marakana caused. There hasn't been compensation for the psychiatric injury that Marakana caused. And perhaps maybe we need to personalize these injuries so that people out there could understand what we are talking about. There are widows who, upon receiving the news of the brutal murder of their husbands in Marakana, collapsed and died, and some of them collapsed and were resuscitated in hospital. There are children, as a result of the trauma of Marakana, who have since fallen into depression and committed suicide because they can no longer take the trauma and the level of living that they have to continue with after the brutal murder of their fathers. So that's the outstanding part of the claim. Yeah. Also, there's constitutional damages because fathers and spouses of people were deprived of, were taken as a result of the murder, were brutalized actually, were murdered, and as a result, there should be compensation for the damage of the protections that the constitution in the country provides to the widows and the families.
All right, let's now bring in Marakana miners attorney Andres Nkome. Now, Nkome is one of the lawyers for the injured and arrested mine workers yet to get their personal compensation they want from President Cyril Ramaphosa. They're also demanding an apology from the president. Mr. Nkome, good afternoon and thank you very much for joining us. So it's 11 years on and most of the criminal cases that we've been following related to the massacre are yet to conclude, but you embarked on a civil process with some of your, at least clients, suing the president as well as Lonmin, now Sibanye, for more than 1 billion. Just give us the status of that case at this point.
Good afternoon and good afternoon to your viewers. Thanks for having me. It has been indeed 11 years that we've started off with this matter, and it's been 11 years that we've been seeking to have an apology from the president of the country in personal capacity to give an apology for what transpired out in Marakana in 2012. We also are waiting to hear in respect of Lonmin to do away with the technical deficiencies that they had brought onto the case and give an apology so that we can have a way going forward. Because we understand that what caused all of this matter was the characterization of the labor dispute as a dastardly criminal act. I would like to have an apology for that simply because it was proven even in front of the Federal Commission that was indeed not so.
And then where is the case right now in court? When is the next appearance?
We are about to finish the last say about 10 matters in respect of the injuries. And we've had a settlement of about 90% of the matters. What we are also looking forward to having is the case in relation to personal liability follow out in court. We expect it to take place anytime between now and the next March, if not April. We hope to then have the president give an apology. We also have the court to order Lonmin to do the same.
Then let's look at some of the recommendations and whether they've been implemented. The Commission recommended that the Mineral Resources Minister should force Lonmin, now Sibanye, to meet its obligation to provide housing for its employees. Now, have those that you're representing indicated if this was implemented?
Look, we have been informed that the recommendations, amongst others, were that the police must undergo training. We have been informed that there ought to be a process in which we participate, wherein we give our view as to who is supposed to be criminally prosecuted for what transpired in Marakana. And we have never had that. Up until now, we know for a fact that in as much as we've been awaiting to put our submissions, none such have been to be brought in.
Now, that recommendation that you're speaking of is the one around public order policing, because I remember the report was quite scathing, actually. It said that it doesn't seem as though SABC can ever manage a crowd without bloodshed. So you're saying, insofar as that one is concerned, you have not seen improvements, and actually you had wanted to contribute when they were to be trained.
It is so, yes. You'd understand that the recommendations, amongst others, went to that the person that is supposed to be fingered for what transpired in Marakana was the then National Police Commissioner, Yapiera. But we haven't had an opportunity to make sure that we communicate to that, simply because our submission was simple. It was that the massacre took place as a result of characterization of a labor dispute as a dastardly criminal act. And therefore, we are looking at reviewing the findings of the Falam Commission insofar as that not been correct.
And then just broadly speaking, how have the injured that you've been representing been coping since then?
I can tell you now that they have lost all hope insofar as expecting that an honest apology will come through. It has been difficult, but they will make sure that through the courts, we have a way going forward insofar as how best to make sure that a court orders an apology to be granted.
All right. Andries, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, the future looks bright for cannabis farming in Limpopo. Young and emerging farmers are tapping into the industry. Now, during his State of the Nation address a bit earlier this year, President Cyril Ramaphosa reiterated government's commitment to unlock investment in the cannabis industry.
Popularly known as marijuana, cannabis is arguably world's most talked about natural herb, and in many countries across the globe, it has been at the center of some of the most contentious legal and religious debates.
Back in the days, our forefathers, they used this herb. We call it a herb. It's something that has been used many years, and it helped a lot of people who are suffered. Now, there are a lot of people who are suffering in chronics.
Makado views cannabis industry as a potential money-spinning entity and a savior of the country's wobbling economy. He will soon be selling his products to markets in Peru, Germany, and the Netherlands.
We sell to our pharmaceuticals and also to individuals who are suffering. So we have products like now we just infused cannabis tea. Then we also have cigars for those who go through depression, who use it. So individual and also the pharmaceuticals. We also targeting the international market. This week I had a meeting with the guys from Holland. They have interest. I think we are going to get into the agreement with them to look forward on working together in that market.
This user says she has been drinking cannabis tea for a long time. She has hailed its health and therapeutic benefits.
I just came back from Cape Town for South Africa netball, and I must go back to work. So I was very tired. So now it's my lunchtime. I just came for a cup so that I can, relieve myself and feel much better.
Meanwhile, Makado recently acquired 50 hectares land in Vembe for hemp farming. Ruth and Obobodi, SABC News, Zenrefir.
South Africa has never had a shortage of female leaders. During the fight against apartheid, South African women were at the forefront, standing their ground in protest of an oppressive state. Now, as we celebrate Women's Month, we look at women who led the process of dismantling the brutal apartheid laws in their capacity as heads of parliament since 1994.
When a woman rules, streams run uphill. This Ethiopian proverb has been taken to heart by African nations, where women have been appointed as leaders of legislative bodies on the continent. According to the Interparliamentary Union, Africa is fast making progress in the appointment of female heads of parliament. In South Africa, since 1994, Parliament has been led by 5 female speakers of the National Assembly and 3 female chairpersons of the National Council of Provinces. Dr. Frine Ginwala was the first Speaker of the National Assembly from 1994 to 2004. Ginwala, who passed away in January, has been described as a speaker who transformed Parliament to an institution that served its people. She was also known for her advocacy of women's rights.
She really made a mark, and particularly in the cause of gender rights in South Africa, always championing the rights of women in the ANC, ensuring that it was high up on the agenda.
In the National Assembly, Ginwala was followed by Baleka Mbete, then Gwen Mahlangu Nkabinde. She was succeeded by Democratic South Africa's only male speaker, Maxi Sulu. Then Mbete again, followed by Thandi Modise and the current speaker, Nosiviwe Mapisa Nqakula. Female chairs in the National Council of Provinces were Dr. Naledi Pandor, Joyce Hoali and Thandi Modise. The IFP says South Africa has always been a trendsetter in appointing female presiding officers.
In these periods of their appointment, they have carried out their duties remarkably and have been firm on the chair, but fair. And I think it's a credit to South Africa and Parliament that female presiding officers could have been appointed. We need to see more females being appointed at other levels, at the Deputy Speaker level, and even at levels of chairpersons of committees, and in all influential positions. Because from my experience and the experience of the IFP, the women parliamentarians have always excelled and carried themselves out diligently and true to their calling.
Other members of Parliament have also commented on being led by these women.
Being a member of the National Assembly since 1994, I would say that the best speaker since 1994 was Dr. Frini Ginwala. She was a competent person. She had gravitas. She ensured that the discipline be maintained in the National Assembly, and she protected the decorum of the National Assembly. The administration in Parliament was also well done and of a high standard. I also want to refer to Thandi Modise when she became the speaker for a short while. Unfortunately, she didn't complete the term. She became the Minister for Defence. But Thandi Modise also had the gravitas in Parliament to ensure that there's more discipline. She also tried her best to protect the decorum of the National Assembly.
In 2015, I worked closely. I had the privilege of accompanying Speaker Baleka Mbete to an official visit. I think we went to China, a parliamentary official visit to China. That's where I saw her in action as a diplomat. She's an outstanding diplomat. She knows how to operate and work in diplomatic circles. And I admired that a great deal about her, and I learned a lot from her, especially about the work I do continentally with human rights and so on. The same can be said with the former NCOP chair and former Speaker Thandi Modise. I worked with her very closely when we were establishing the BRICS Parliamentary Forum. When things were about to fall apart, she's the one who, through her, initiated a lot of strategic bilateral meetings between India and South Africa, between India and many other BRICS countries, to try and make sure that we're able to forge a common vision for the future. I work with Speaker Nosiviwe Mapisa Nqakula now at IPU level, International Parliamentary Union, where at all these platforms, on all these platforms, we always prioritize South Africa. We're about and for South Africa. We forget about our political labels.
MPs say these leaders are owed a debt of gratitude, saying not only did they make a contribution to the liberation struggle, but they also continue to play a role towards strengthening and enhancing the country's constitutional democracy. Abra Barbia, SABC News, Parliament.
All right, let's shift our focus to this story now. More than 90 Tswana municipal workers have been dismissed. Now, this is following the ongoing strike that has now lasted nearly 3 weeks. Members of the South African Municipal Workers Union, that's SAMU, have been on strike since July, demanding salary increases. For more on this, let's now bring in Precious Teledi, Acting Regional Secretary General for the union. Good afternoon, Precious. Thank you very much for joining us. Firstly, can you or are you in a position to indicate the exact number of dismissed workers at this point?
Good afternoon. Unfortunately, I can't say how many workers have been dismissed at the moment because remember the city would issue letters to individuals and the individuals should come to the union for representation. So far, the letters that we are having in our possession are close to 10 dismissed workers. But we haven't heard anyone saying they have been dismissed. But since the city is indicating that they have dismissed more than 90, it means we are still going to receive letters from workers from Monday.
Now, this particular strike is a very difficult one because on several platforms we have heard the mayor state that you as SAMU have not been very helpful because when they try to interact with you, they try to question you on this, and you actually said your members are not on strike. And then when they speak to other trade unions, those trade unions say, no, but our members cannot go to work because they're being threatened by those who are striking. Can you just give us clarity on all that's been happening there in the city?
As SAMU, we requested for a general meeting and a march on the 26th. And, it's not SAMU members who were not paid the 2.5 and 5.4. So all workers are aggrieved because of the non-payment of salary increase. At the moment, as SAMU, we are saying we are not on strike, and we've been issuing letters. The General Secretary issued a letter to indicate to our members to go back to their workplace. And we issued a letter on Friday to urge our members to go back to their workplace. So whomever is not adhering to the letter, we are taking that the person is not our member. Remember, we have those that belong to SAMU, those that belongs to the other union, and those that chose not to belong to any union. And there are main unions that other workers are trying to join. So what's happening cannot necessarily be blamed on SAMU. It's unfortunate that it started during our march. But
I'm sure then you understand the challenges that the mayor is facing as well, because he's here saying you've got employees that are not coming to work, but there's no union that's claiming that its workers or members are on some sort of a stay away, but there are services that are not being rendered or delivered to citizens or community members. So what exactly, for clarity's sake, what was your position or instruction to your members when there was that position taken by the city of a 0% increase?
Our position was to engage the city, and we are currently doing that. We even proposed to the city manager. We had meetings with the executive mayor and the city manager, and we also had a follow-up meeting with them. Then we continuously met with the city manager, where we even proposed a way forward that they may look for money whereby they can start paying those that are earning very low. Now, it's not true that they are engaging and we are not coming to the party. But what we cannot agree to is for the city to say SAMU is on strike. SAMU is not on strike unless the city can prove to us and show us that this person is your member and put it on and have records to indicate that this person is our member so that we can deal with such. Because as SAMU, we are not on strike. And we communicated to our members that they should go back to work. Yes.
And that's what they've stated, that you insist that your members are not on strike. But what they're dealing with is members that are not at work. And some of those who aren't coming to work are saying they're being threatened by striking workers, but they cannot necessarily identify which union has instructed its members to go on strike. But then beyond this, at this point, you say that you have indeed received 10 dismissal letters for your members. Why were they dismissed?
The dismissed workers are those, the majority of them, they are those that are working at electricity. The city, because of its frustration that they can't switch on lights, they targeted everybody that is working as a switcher, and they're dismissing those. And workers have been indicating, even before the march of the 26th, that they have been attacked by communities out there, and the city has not done anything. we communicated with the city regarding Juku Lane. There's an area in Soshanguve called Juku Lane, whereby our members have been attacked a long time ago, around April, May. We've been engaging with the city and nothing has been forthcoming. Now, because there's a havoc in the city, they are now pleading public sympathy to say some members that are on strike are intimidating people. Our members have been intimidated even before the 26th. And it's true, those that are working, they are saying even to us that we are being intimidated. And unfortunately, the city wants us to identify those people, and those people that are intimidating us, some of them, we don't know them. How can I identify somebody I don't know? And we are saying to the city, they must provide security. And they must ensure that the security that they are providing is consistent, because we've raised the issue of security prior to the 26th of July.
So you're saying, at the very least at this point, everybody should be reinstated, because you're saying they cannot even identify those that are intimidating them.
Exactly.
All right. Precious, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's Precious Teledi. She's the Acting Regional Secretary General for SAMO. Now, tomorrow sees the start of the BRICS Inward Buying and Investment Business Forum in Gauteng. The Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Mr. Fikile Machola, will address the meeting on how the platform will facilitate meaningful connections between international buyers and relevant South African partners. The build-up to the BRICS Leaders Summit later this month seeks to foster business partnerships and expanding market access. We're now joined by Paulina Mamakgobo. She's DTIC Director for International Operations. Paulina, good afternoon, and thank you very much for your time. So there are several meetings or sessions lined up ahead of the BRICS Summit. Just take us through the purpose of this inward buying and investment missions.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to your listeners as well. So, as you would understand, as part of this year's BRICS Summit focus, we have what is led by the DTIC, which is the business program that is around that runs on the peripherals of the actual BRICS Summit. And what opens up or sets the scene for this is the Inward Buying and Investment Mission. And the Inward Buying and Investment Mission, the purpose of it is mainly to be able to promote investment opportunities for South Africa, and of course with the goal of us also growing our export growth. The main focus of this mission itself is to be able to expose our BRIC counterparts to the opportunities that South Africa has, both with an objective of attracting investment in the different areas of focus, the sectors which I will make mention of, and of course then saying, how do we create collaborative linkages with the objective to manufacture from South Africa and to be able to grow our export or value-added exports to the rest of the globe, mainly with our BRIC counterparts and of course with the rest of our African counterparts as well. So that is the main mission, meaning that we are welcoming delegates from our BRIC counterparts, and also looking at the overarching theme of the summit itself. We are also bringing in representation from our African counterparts as well to expose them to the different opportunities in the province. And with this particular Inward Buying and Investment Mission, we are focusing on 4 provinces, which is our big provinces, and then we did extend it to the Eastern Cape to be able to decentralize economic activity. So we'll be launching in Gauteng, which is the main economic hub, as we would know, moving to the Western Cape, and of course then to KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape, as I did mention.
All right, and then just share with us just those specific sectors that you'll be focusing on.
Okay, these are sectors that South Africa has a significant interest in. Of course, manufacturing being the main one, because as you would know, significantly our trade was based more on minerals and ores. So we're trying to ensure that as part of our industrialization strategies, we promote manufacturing. And of course, it's quite broad and it cuts across the different sectors. But we also have the automotive sector. As you would know, that South Africa on the African continent is one of the leaders in terms of automotives manufacturing. We're also looking at agriculture and agro-processing, and of course that the focus being agro-processing value-added products, and of course then the pharmaceutical sector as well, and one which we cannot ignore given our current energy crisis, energy and energy infrastructure. So that is investment in the renewables as well. And of course, given the strength in terms of our value proposition of our financial sectors in South Africa, also in the context of the continent, we are also having companies that will be coming through to the country to engage on B2B elements around the finance sector.
And then just envisaged attendance in terms of your stakeholders, who exactly are we expecting at the start, particularly here in Gauteng?
Okay, so of course then the Deputy Ministers of Trade and Industry will be anchoring the different legs of the inward buying and investment mission. So that is to say that we will be having representation from a national department. Trade and Industry will also have our other national department counterparts. We'll be having representation from our heads of missions as well, both in Africa heads of missions and the BRICS heads of missions. We'll be having representation from our provincial and local governments. But most importantly, because this focuses on the business component of the BRICS program, we're having representation from BRICS countries, that's investors and buyers. So we are looking at a composition of about 80 to 100 delegates that are coming from the BRIC countries, and of course also representation from our other African countries. Important to mention as well, it's because this will be a feeder into the second leg of the business program, which is the exhibition component. So this representation means that we are, as part of showcasing the capabilities and the opportunities that South Africa has, we are also ensuring that South African companies themselves, they are able to interact with these multinationals to be able to see what rooms for collaboration are there, and how can we then strengthen opportunities to also sell what we are producing, and of course to strengthen our industrialization. Aspects.
All right. Paulina, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's Paulina Mamokgobo from DTIC. To this story now, while Europe is suffering heat wave upon heat wave, experts warn that similar extreme weather events will also hit South Africa in the next 6 months. This can potentially lead to more deaths in vulnerable communities like those that occurred in January of this year in Cannabis in the Northern Cape. Climate modelling shows that within the next 10 years, South Africa will experience heat waves of unprecedented intensity, and it is therefore imperative that we become far more aware of the heat risks in South Africa. Lizette Labaskagni and video journalist Jabu Oa Africa compiled this report for us.
Uppington in the Northern Cape, ideally suited for establishing solar energy plants to expand the country's renewable energy program, in line with the 2050 net zero emissions goals. But this is easier said than done. With a failing electricity network, pressure is building on government to provide a stable network, as our sense of safety and security is closely linked to our ability to keep the lights on. This could mean that the country will rely on coal-generated electricity for longer than anticipated. While many advocate for greener energy solutions, it might not happen overnight.
I think the stability and the sanity of our society relies on having electricity. And we are every day, everything in our life assume that we have electricity. And by saying, okay, we are going to solve one crisis now by creating another, might be even a bigger one, is obviously not a technical solution. So, no, we definitely cannot start switching just stuff off left and right. There needs to be a transition period. However, what is good from setting out of reach demands and goals is it really pushes us to move at least as far as possible. So by putting the peg in 10 steps ahead of you, and you know you cannot get to 10 steps, but you might get to 3 or 4 steps at least. Where if we put the peg in only 3 or 4 steps in front of us, then we will only get 1 step ahead.
Renewable energy sources are a very divisive topic, but all agree that the country needs a well-diversified energy plan to reach our net zero goals, to be carbon neutral by 2050. Time is, however, running out.
Well, if the intention to be net zero on the electricity generation side by 2050, then I think the answer is quite clearly that there's no way that we'll be able to reach that. In order to reach that, we will need significant free money. Somebody will have to give us the money to make significant investments, not only in our national grid, but also in electricity generators to reach such a goal, and storage systems in the next 25 years. It's impossible. The resources are not available. The financing is not available. It can just not happen.
The South African government has also made provision for 2,500 megawatts of nuclear energy as part of the Integrated Resources Plan. Building a nuclear plant, however, takes time.
When you build a nuclear power plant, the shortest possible time you can start to operate it based on international projects. The record one was actually 43 months in a plant called Kashiwazaki Kariwa. It's called, people abbreviated KK6. It's unit 6 of the KK plant in Japan. But that was never replicated. So we can safely say minimum you need 60 months to finish the construction. By that time, if you are serious, you will have built up the expertise so that by year 6-7, when you put it in commissioning, you have a critical mass of skills to pick up.
The building of renewable energy sources like solar plants are cheaper than building new coal-fired power stations. It can also be fully operational in a shorter space of time, which makes it an ideal solution to replace coal-fired power stations. The government's energy roadmap, the Integrated Resources Plan, is however already outdated because of the delay in releasing it. If we continue to use coal-fired power stations, the most vulnerable in our society, like the elderly and the poor, will likely bear the brunt of the consequences. South Africa therefore urgently needs a climate health warning system.
We need to systematically adapt to more extreme temperature events, hot extremes, in the Southern African region. So that includes long-term adaptation. Of course, we shouldn't accept that our people will remain this vulnerable forever. So part of this adaptation is proper housing. Naturally ventilated buildings that don't become so hot in summer. Having easy access to cool water for all our people. Those are key measures that will reduce our vulnerability in the long run.
In the meantime, internal power struggles within the ANC are also creating an obstacle to reach the net zero emissions goals. If this is not resolved, experts have no hope that we will be able to avoid serious climate change events decimating the most vulnerable. This package was created with the support and funding from Internews Earth Journalism Network. Lizette Labuschagne, SABC News, Uppington.
All right, and that's where we leave it for today. We're back next week. Enjoy your afternoon further.